For our top story this hour, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton is branding Russia and China's activities in Africa as, quote, predatory practices. He made those statements while unveiling the United States' new strategy for the African continent, which he claims is aimed at the future prosperity of the region. RT's Murad Gazdiab explains.
Disregarding that it reads more like a declaration of war than a strategy, this plan is for the good of Africa, promises John Bolton. This coming from a guy whose boss, Trump, infamously referred to several African nations as something that I can't mention on air.
The predatory practices pursued by China and Russia stunt economic growth in Africa, threaten the financial independence of African nations, and pose a significant threat to U.S. national security interests. It's
interesting logic. So when China or Russia or someone else you don't like lends an African nation money, that's debt colonialism, almost financial slavery. When America does it, it's investment for Africa's own good. Worth mentioning is that Russia's trade with the continent pales into insignificance when compared to the US or China. Look at this rail line, this highway, hydropower station, all built with Chinese investment. Beijing is raising entire cities with more to come.
China is willing to provide another $60 billion in support of Africa through government assistance, investment, and financing of financial institutions and enterprises.
The phrase "actions speak louder than words" is entirely applicable here. The Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, has visited Africa 9 times during his tenure.
And joining us now to discuss the future in Africa is history professor at the University of Houston, Gerald Horne. Professor, thanks for being with us today. So John Bolton is blasting China and Russia for advancing their respective relationships with the whole of Africa, calling China and Russia corrupt. Should African leaders heed this advice from John Bolton?
The short answer is no. They should only heed that advice if they're interested in continuing to be a caboose on a train driven by Washington, Paris, and London. It's difficult to know whether to laugh or cry when listening to Mr. Bolton's remarks. After all, I sit here as a descendant of the African slave trade, which is the epitome, the symbol of the historic relation with the African continent and the United States of America. Sadly enough, what Mr. Bolton is proposing is not going to help African nations dig out of the hole that was dug for them as a result not only of the African slave trade, but of colonialism and neocolonialism.
And I want to touch for a second on the Chinese. Now, they didn't take these insults lying down. Take a listen to what the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman fired back with, and then I'll get your thoughts on the other side.
When it comes to cooperation with Africa, we always keep in mind their needs and discuss how to properly tackle them, such as modernized agriculture and rapid industrialization. The relevant people from the U.S., however, besides talking about their own needs, they just think about how to counter China and Russia with Africa. This is interesting. Who is truly making benefits for Africa, and who has ulterior motives in Africa? Justice will prevail.
Professor, how do you foresee Chinese-African relations playing out in this next millennia?
Well, if you look at what's going on in Africa now, if today is any indication of the future, things look rather bright and promising. After all, just recently, Senegal and Dakar, the capital, opened a museum of black civilization funded by China. There's a major railroad built in Ethiopia that leads into Djibouti, giving that landlocked country an opening to the sea, financed by China. There's a railroad from Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, to Mombasa, the Indian Ocean port city, financed by China. All of this is pure adrenaline to the economies of these African nations. And if that's any indication, I think that relations between China and Africa are bright. Certainly, Mr. Bolton proposed nothing of that dimension or scale.
Well, there were not details, that's for sure. People were quite disappointed that it was a lot of platitudes. And Bolton